All right, then, Econ friends, welcome back to another video. In this video, what I really want to do is very quickly and briefly address issues tied to market concentration, okay? We learned in our last video that oligopoly is like competition among the few, that there were a small number of firms that really ran the industry. This implied that there was a level of market power and market concentration. I want to give you a little quick overview of how economists think through that, okay? So this big idea here, and there's only one big idea with two small examples. To identify an oligopoly, economists typically rely on a variety of measures of market concentration. Market concentration, also known as industry concentration. And basically what these measurements do is they attempt to identify industry by industry just how concentrated, how oligopolistic the industry is, okay? This is used by economists to make their assumptions and build their models. This is also used by the Department of Justice when they look to either approve or deny mergers, okay? So these attempts to measure market concentration are used both to measure the market as it is, as well as to measure how a market would be if a merger went through, okay? There's basically two ways that we measure concentration in economics. One common measure is what we call the market's concentration ratio, which is also known as a CR ratio. And what a concentration ratio does is it shows the percentage of market sales that are accounted for by the biggest firms in the industry. So for example, you might see what's known as a CR4. A CR4, concentration ratio 4, this shows the overall percentage of the entire industry that the top 4 firms collectively have. You might also see sometimes a CR8. Same idea. A CR8, a concentration ratio 8, this attempts to give an idea of the total market power that the top 8 firms have. So you could have a CR4, a CR8, a CR6. Ultimately, it's an attempt to show the percentage of overall market sales that are accounted for by the largest firms, you know, the 4 or the 8, depending on your ratio, in the industry. Big idea here, higher concentration ratios imply more oligopolistic industries. In other words, the higher the CR ratio, the more powerful those small number of firms are, the more concentrated the industry, the stronger the oligopoly. And of course, that's probably going to get a little bit more attention from antitrust lawyers at the Department of Justice. A second measure that we use in economics is what is known as the Herfindahl-Hirschman Index, which is also known as the HHI. The HHI is done with some pretty simple math. It's simply calculated by taking the square of the percentage market share of each firm in the industry and adding it, okay? Sounds complicated, it's really not. You just lay out all the firms, you take the market shares, square them and add them. And that number will fall within a range. And based on that range, economists and Department of Justice antitrust lawyers can categorize an industry as, you know, less concentrated, more competitive, or more concentrated, more oligopolistic, less competitive, okay? Again, the HHI, a lot more mathematical, but it's easy to do, and we can figure it out in class. Here's the big thing. Even though we talk about these metrics, the CR ratios and the HHI, in practice, actually measuring market concentration, it's extremely complicated. And it's complicated for several reasons, one of which is it's really difficult to fully measure and define the relevant market. I mean, let's do an example. Let's take the example of soda. So we know that Coke and Pepsi, these two firms effectively form a duopoly, right? A highly concentrated structure industry where Coke and Pepsi dominate global soda trade. But it's not that easy because what's the actual relevant market? Is it soda? Is it carbonated drinks? Is it any soft drink? Is it any non-alcoholic drink? You can splice and dice and define a market in lots of ways. So you might say, for example, yes, soda with Coke and Pepsi is a massive oligopoly in the soda industry. But if you take the broader market of, let's say, soft drinks or non-alcoholic drinks, and you add in water and tea and coffee and juices and these other things, all of a sudden, as you change the definition of the market, you change the underlying concentration. And you have to bear those things in mind because we know that people look for substitutes, both real and potential. Okay. What this implies is that some firms with high market share in what we're going to call their narrowly defined industry might face some competition from non-traditional but related industries. You see this now in big tech. You know, as we see, for example, Amazon make moves into content. Years ago, nobody would have thought that Amazon, which was seen as a bookseller, would be a rival to network TV or HBO. Yet now with Amazon Prime and Amazon Prime Video, we're seeing that what was once a really narrowly defined market structure is changing. And you have to be fluid in your thinking in an effort to understand what's the real relevant market here. And anytime that you're taking a look at either concentration ratios or, CR ratios or HHIs, you have to make sure that you're being a creative and critical thinker when you define what is the quote relevant market. Okay. Final point I'll make, which just ties into it, is that what I just talked about, the idea of potential substitutes and the market definition, this is complicated even further by the fact that you have to add in geographical and global competition too. Companies rarely compete anymore in strictly national level competitions. We find that lots of industries are now increasingly global in nature. The original use of things like CR ratios and HHIs were typically national tools for a nation. It doesn't really factor in the broad geographical and global competition that firms today face. Okay, so I wanted to raise with you in this video idea of market concentration, share with you two of the tools that we use in economics to measure it, but also get you thinking critically as well-thinking, intelligent citizens about the fact that those concentrations aren't as simple as they seem. You have to have, as always in economics, some nuance. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.